You can always on the collaborative YouTube. And so for Suzanne's friends who are joining us, first of all, we're so excited we're here. And what this program is, the Advanced Learning Institute, is it's been an evolution, but it's one of the first programs that we initiated when we our first initiatives is when we opened 10 years ago. We are a community based creative space that does what we feel is important and unique work. Originally just in Orange County, but after COVID, on we obviously there were virtual opportunities and partnerships to be had. We collaborate with institutions and also with talented individuals. And Suzanne is one of the talented individuals that we collaborate with. She's one of about five sort of our regular in-house scholars that teach a couple times a year at the Advanced Learning Institute. And then sometimes we have a visitor who like will only do something once, but we meet every Monday and do different series of classes. So really excited that you're here. There is no charge, of course, to be part of the Advanced Learning Institute. Anyone can sign up. We do appreciate donations because that's how we pay our teachers. So if that's something you're able to do, we are most grateful. If you have done it, we thank you. And without further ado, Romance and the Rabbis.
Thanks so much, Marcia. Can you make me co-host so that I can share my screen?
I'm so sorry.
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see all of you. I recognize almost everybody from before, so this is so great. And Robin, I believe you were my congregant in Temple Sinai in Oakland, so it's nice to see you.
Hi.
Hi there. Um, so I want to just begin by telling you that most of what I'm going to tell you is inspired and taken from a book called A Bride for One Night, which we're going to go into a little bit later, and it's by Ruth Calderon, Calderon. Ruth Calderon created a secular yeshiva in Tel Aviv, and kind of not religious, but finding that our tradition is so rich with so much, and she is the one who presents all of these kind of somewhat odd stories. I think you'll find it interesting to see what the Talmud actually has in it, not always what you might expect. So, just to refresh our memories, I want to share with you um, what marriage in the Talmud is all about, and it's pretty much what it still is today. Um, so it's of course a sacred occasion, right? Kiddushin is part of the ceremony, which is related to the word kadosh, holy, and it's a legal contract. The ketubah is a legal contract, right? And the husband has certain obligations, to feed and house and clothe her and to give her sex, believe it or not. Um, and there are two parts of the wedding ceremony. The first part, Erusin, is also called Kiddushin, which is basically, once it's sort of like being engaged, but once you're engaged in this way, you are basically bound to this person. You can't have any other sexual relations. And Nisuin is the actual final, now you're actually technically married. These two used to happen about a year apart from each other, and now they're all part of the same ceremony. And as I said, the ketubah is a contract, right? And in fact, the reason that you cannot do a wedding on Shabbat is because it's, quote, a commercial transaction. Because technically, the husband is acquiring the bride, okay? Just the way you might go buy a cow. And divorce can only be initiated by the husband. It's called a get. And if the husband doesn't want to give you a get, which happens a lot, then the wife becomes an aguna, a chained woman. She can't actually have any other husband until the man gives her a get, and if he doesn't, she's stuck forever. So I just wanted to give you that background. Now, let me ask you, what is the definition of adultery in Judaism? Anybody know?
Does it only apply to the female? Men?
Well, it only applies to if the female is married. Okay, so if a man is married and has an affair with a woman who's not married, that's not considered adultery. But if a man has a relationship with a woman who is married, that is considered adultery because you're messing with somebody else's property.
Are they both guilty or just the female?
Yeah, they're both guilty. But, oh, hi, Hillel. Good friend, Rabbi Hillel Cohen. So, yeah, no, they're both guilty, but it's only when the woman is married. Okay, so now we're going to talk about a phenomenon that it's in the Talmud, it's not practiced anymore, but it gives you an idea. Oh, Bobby, you have a question.
Yes. When you said that they have to give you a get in order to be divorced or separated, what happened until death do us part? When he dies, does that release you from your marriage vows?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so and till death do us part is a not a Jewish statement of a vow, but that's okay. No, I'm glad you asked that question. So the ketubah not only says that the husband has to provide, for the wife in terms of, her clothing, her food, her housing, and sex, but there's a certain amount of property that is designated for her in case of a divorce or a death. So that's one of the reasons men sometimes don't want to give a get, because they have to give her this property. It's a guarantee to try to protect her. And yes, of course, if a husband dies, she's released and she gets that property. But what if the husband disappears? It's a whole other story that I don't want to get into. I'm reading a book right now called Jewish Marital Captivity, to give you some idea. Anyway, I don't want to go there right now. That'll be our next round of classes. But I want to start looking at, okay, where is she? There she is, a sotah. Okay, so the sotah is the woman who is an adulteress. And you may know some of this from the Torah, because in the Torah, does somebody want to read this? You could just unmute and start reading.
Megan, would you read?
Numbers 5. When any person's wife has gone astray and broken faith with him, in that another man has had carnal relationships with her unbeknownst to her husband, and she keeps secret the fact that she has defiled herself without being forced, and there is no witness against her. And a fit of jealousy comes over him, and he is wrought up about his wife who has defiled herself. Or if a fit of jealousy comes over, wrought up about his wife, although she has not defiled herself, the man shall bring his wife to the priest.
Ooh. Okay, don't go away. We're gonna come back to you in a moment. Thank you so much. Just so here, obviously it says she has defiled herself without being forced. In other words, she hasn't been raped, right? She's gone in willingly. And, whether or not she actually has committed the sin of, having carnal relations with some other guy, doesn't matter. Either she did or she didn't. He's jealous. He takes her to the priest. Okay, let's see what happens next. You mind continuing, Megan?
No. And he shall bring as her offering for her 1/10 of an ephah of barley flour. No oil shall be poured upon it, and no frankincense shall be laid on it, for it is a meal of offering of jealousy. It is a meal offering of remembrance, which recalls wrongdoing. The priest shall bring her forward and shall have her stand before Yud-Heh Vav-Heh. The priest shall take sacred water in an earthen vessel, and taking some of the earth that is on the floor of the tabernacle, the priest shall put it into the water. The priest shall make the woman stand before Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, and he shall unravel the woman's hair and place upon her hands the meal offering of remembrance, which is a meal offering of jealousy.
Okay, one more.
In the priest's hands shall be the water of bitterness that induces the spell, The priest shall adjure the woman, saying to her, if no man has lain with you, if you have not gone astray in defilement while married to your husband, be immune to harm from this water of bitterness that induces the spell. But if you have gone astray while married to your husband and have defiled yourself, if a man other than your husband has had carnal relations with you, may Yud He Vav He make you a curse and an imprecation against your people. As Yud He Vav He causes your thigh to sag and your belly to distend, may this water that induces the spell enter your body, causing the belly to distend and the thigh to sag. And the woman shall say, Amen, Amen.
So you notice, by the way, that the woman has absolutely nothing to say until the very end, where she has to say amen, like, okay, cool, whatever you're doing is fine. Okay, so let's just talk about this for a moment. Any thoughts about this particular procedure? Good, bad, indifferent, awful?
Well, there's nothing
Jay?
for the man, first of all.
Yeah, what about the man?
The man is not, is this, even though he's adult, I mean, it takes two to be adulterous.
Right.
The man, it's only the woman who is tested, but not the man.
Good point. Good point. Sylvia.
Thank you. And the other thing is this takes into no account rape, and having been forced to doing something, raping a woman, and so the woman is forced to concede because um, and there's nothing for the man. I mean,
You noticed that, huh?
Oh yeah, right away.
Now, let me ask you something. Do you think drinking this potion, which you take a little earth from the floor and you mix it up, do you think that's actually going to cause harm to the woman?
Well, yeah, she has to ingest it. Yes, it does.
True.
I mean,
it probably doesn't taste great.
Doesn't taste great. That's true. But if she ingests it in the first place, it's going to do her great harm. No way is she getting out of this punishment.
Well, actually, to tell you the truth, there's something positive about this. You may think she's nuts. What do you think is positive about this? Notice he takes her to the priest, okay? So he's all jealous and crazy because, his wife supposedly was sleeping with somebody else. He's all crazy about it. And he could just beat her up or kill her or, have his family kill her, whatever, that happens in various cultures. I'm sure you know. But he has to take her to the priest. And the priest is doing this thing, not him.
So this is
Oh, he's
Martha.
innocent.
Marcia, go ahead.
I was going to say that is really, it's actually a brilliant innovation that what he's doing is there's a forced intermediary who, if they have their wits about them and are really objective and thoughtful, it's almost the closest thing they're going to get in that time to a marriage counselor, someone to talk to both of them, to let the heat dissipate a little bit.
Absolutely.
And by going through this ritual, which may not kill somebody. I mean, listen, people eat dirt and they live for a long time. So in theory, the lady could drink this sort of, defiled water or something, make her sick for a little while. She'll have some diarrhea or whatever, but she won't. That in theory, this could actually elongate her life and protect her further, even though it seems like a very hostile gesture.
Exactly.
And by the way, it's the same thing with the divorce decree in Deuteronomy 24, when, the fact that the man would have to, if he wanted to kick his wife out, he'd have to write, having nothing to do with this, write her a bill of divorce. He has to find somebody who can write. He has to find the parchment. He has to find this. That also buys them a couple of weeks, and maybe he won't hate her so much, by the end. Just some interesting innovations of the Torah of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Robin, you've had your hand up.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that the punishment that this potion is going to deliver to her is effectively going to reduce her appeal, her physical appeal. it's going to cause her thigh to become saggy and her belly to become distended. And, we understand in our time that having a flat abdomen and firm legs and thighs is part of kind of conventional beauty. So I think that is an interesting punishment, that she's going to be rendered less desirable in
True,
the eyes
true.
of.
And we'll see what the rabbis do with that to make it even worse. So the chances of her thigh, and her belly distending and all that are probably pretty slim. So, she's probably going to come away from that innocent. Okay. Now the witches, on the other hand, they were thrown into the water, and if they drowned, it meant they were innocent. Okay. So in this case, at least we're not, killing them to prove their innocence. Okay, I'm going to share with you what Ruth Calderon has to say about this. There we are. Okay, so the ritual of the bitter waters is a ceremony that developed in response to men's primal fear of women. Okay, so she's looking at this from sort of a more sociological point of view. Why is it that we even have this ritual? When a woman becomes pregnant, only she and God know whose seed is inside her. Well, this is something that creates a lot of anxiety in men, right? And no offense to any of the men on the call, but who is the father? Oh my God, that's really important. So a man needs to have sons in order to ensure that his name will live on. He can only wonder, how will I know whether it's really my children, right? This is something that I'm not a man, so I can't completely, connect to this, but you always know who the mother is, but you don't always know who the man is, which, by the way, in the Bible, in the Torah, it's patrilineal descent. Okay. It's really important that the father and the son, etc., are connected. But in the Mishnah, which was edited in the year 200, they changed it to matrilineal because during the rebellion against the Romans, a lot of women were raped and you didn't know who the father was. And then that creates a really complicated society. So matrilineal became the important marker of who you were. So, and then Ruth Calderon says, men, of course, do not hold themselves to the same standards to which they hold their wives. There's no ritual for a man, as you've pointed out. It was possible for a woman to survive the ceremony. After all, the bitter waters are not necessarily fatal. The biblical ritual serves its desired function. A man is able to overcome his lack of control that haunts him by turning his wife over to the priest. Again, he himself is not going to deal with her directly, right? Because that is really, dangerous. Now, this lady, Gilla Langer, tells us that it might have been a way of compelling the husband to assert paternity for a baby of suspicious parentage without damaging his self-respect. Okay, so let's say the wife did have an affair, okay, and it's not his seed, but not only is he going to be anxious about that, he's also going to be humiliated in front of other people. So this way, we've determined she's not guilty, right? And you are the father of whatever baby comes up in the next round. And also, there's a protection here that it keeps women and their newborn children from being cast out of their homes and communities with no means of support, right? Because, if her belly were to distend and her thighs were to sag, which is doubtful from drinking this, she would then be cast out of the community, and her children would be mamzerim, they're called. It's sort of like being bastards. And she would have no means of support. Because in those days, if you didn't have a husband, a father, or son, you're really out of luck. And it might have been a means to protect women from the power of male jealousy. But you get some unexpected offspring, and they still are part of the community, which again, I think is the reasoning for why matrilineal descent was important. When we're talking about what happened in Judea during the Roman rebellion. You don't know who these kids are, and you don't want the society to fall apart, right? I mean, it's important to know that a woman hasn't slept with another man, but at the same time, you don't want people, in the community who are outcasts, have no means to support themselves, and the children are innocent. So I found a very contradictory response on the part of the rabbis. So there's midrash, right? Midrash is interpretation of the text. Sometimes it's legalistic, sometimes it's more just stories and interpretations. And then you have the Talmud, which is not really a law code. It's more discussions about the law. But there are two ways in which they've approached this. So let me show you the first way, which is not so nice. So rabbinic commentators seem to take an extra degree of pleasure in enumerating the imagined sins of the woman. So this is now not in the Torah anymore. This is the commentary on the part of the rabbis. And this is Midrash Rabbah, which means a lot of Midrash, great Midrash. She painted her eyes for his sake, and so her eyes bulge. In other words, she went and had this affair and was like a floozy, right? She put on all this extra makeup. She painted her hair for his sake, and so the priest dishevels her hair. She beckoned him with her fingers, and her fingernails fall off. She put on a fine girdle for his sake. We're talking about the guy that she's having the affair with. And so the priest brings a common rope and ties it above her breast. She extended her thigh to him, and therefore her thigh falls away. She gave him to drink choice wine in exquisite flagons or flagons. I looked it up, and flagons, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. They're, receptacles to drink from. Therefore, the priest gives her to drink the water of bitterness in a piece of earthenware. So all the things that she did to be attractive, and to attract this other gentleman, she's going to get back, tenfold. Okay, now this is the Mishnah, which is part of the Talmud. Does somebody want to read this? Jim?
I'll read it.
Okay, I got
Okay,
it.
Robin, thank you.
Yeah,
Jim,
I just
Jim.
had to unmute. A priest gets hold of her garments. If they get torn, they are torn. If they are ripped, let them be ripped, so that her bosom becomes uncovered. He undoes her hair. Rabbi Yehuda says, if she has a beautiful bosom, he does not uncover it. If she has beautiful hair, he does not undo it. If she was dressed in white, he dresses her in black. If she wore ornaments of gold chains and rings in her nose and on her finger, they were taken away from her to make her look repulsive. Then the priest take an Egyptian rope and tie it above her breast. Whoever wants to gaze at her may come up and gaze upon her, with the exception of her slaves and bondswomen, because of her heart would be hardened by this. All the women are permitted to gaze at her, as was said, that all women may be taught not to do after lewdness.
Thank you, Jim. So whoever said before that it makes her unattractive, I think it was Robin, this is making her really unattractive, right? Everything that she had to make herself beautiful is turned into something to make her ugly. Now, later, the Mishnah is the first layer of the Talmud. So the Talmud itself has a whole tractate devoted to the sota, which is really interesting. You know why? They didn't practice it anymore. So the fact that they have a whole tractate connected to it is kind of interesting. So the ritual was tempered by the sages, as we'll see. They wanted to abolish the ritual in an attempt to replace dramatic divine intervention with pragmatic human solutions. So in other words, whatever the ritual was, supposedly, somehow, because of the priests in the temple and the place it all takes place, it becomes more of a religious ritual, and they're trying to do something more practical. And they also, the sages in the Talmud, created an intermediate stage in which the husband is required to state explicitly in the presence of two witnesses the identity of the man he suspects. So let me show you what that looks like. Okay, now this is part of, again, the Mishnah, which is part of the Talmud. And it's just interesting that these descriptions about how horrible the ritual is going to be for her were written at a time when they weren't even practicing this, but they felt the need to expand on it. So this is what the rabbis make as conditions for this accusation. So the husband, issues a warning to her. Now, the thick letters are what's actually in the Talmud. The regular letters are just filling in for, understanding what they're talking about. So he issues a warning to her in the presence of two witnesses. If two witnesses were not present for the warning, she's not a sotah, even if two witnesses saw her seclusion with another man. So let's say she really did go cohabitate with this guy, and two people saw her doing this. Not good enough. The husband has to warn her ahead of time with two witnesses, okay? Rabbi Yehoshua says he both issues a warning to her based on two witnesses and gives the bitter water for her to drink based on the testimony of two witnesses. Then the Mishnah asks, how does he issue a warning to her in an effective manner? If he says to her in the presence of two witnesses, do not speak with a man called so-and-so, and she nevertheless spoke with him, she's still permitted to her home, i.e., she's permitted to engage in sexual intercourse with her husband. In other words, obviously, if she committed adultery, the husband no longer wants her or can have her. However, if after he told her not to speak so-and-so, she entered into a secluded place and remained with that man long enough to become defiled, i.e., sufficient time to engage in sexual intercourse, she's forbidden to her home from that moment until she undergoes the sotah rite. Now, so in other words, he has to issue her a warning about a very specific man, okay? And it has to be in front of two witnesses, which is pretty difficult for that to actually happen, okay? It's very difficult for all of these conditions to be met. And that's what the rabbis do. If there's something they don't like, they find a way to make it impossible to do it. Let me just give you another example. There's a story in the Torah about a disobedient, rebellious son. And again, you bring him to the elders of the city and they stone him. Now, the Talmud says, oh, who can have this kind of horrible thing happen? And they can't get rid of it because it's a Torah law. You don't toss out Torah laws, right? So what do? They make it impossible. Both parents have to come at the same time and say the same thing, and on and on and on. So they make it impossible. Same thing with the sotah. It has to be two witnesses about a specific man. She has to have gone into a secluded place where she would have had time to, have this intercourse. Okay. Yes. Does somebody have a question or comment? No? Okay. Let me go on here. Share. Here we go. Okay. So two points of view on this. So Judith Antonelli says the law of Soto is not so much designed to punish unfaithful wives, although it did. It was primarily intended to protect innocent women from possessive, abusive husbands who are consumed by irrational fits of jealousy. So in other words, according to Judith Antonelli, this actually was, as we said in the very beginning, a way to protect the wife, right? So that she wouldn't get killed by her husband or her husband's family. On the other hand, according to Ishai Rosenzvi, although the sotah trial was probably discontinued, if it was ever indeed practiced during the Second Temple era, its cultural presence continued due to the study of tractate sotah as part of the Talmudic codex. In other words, it's probably not practiced anymore. Great. But it was studied over and over and over again. Today, it's still studied. It's a whole tractate of the Talmud. You're not going to ignore it. So unfortunately, that puts certain, points of view into the heads of those who study it, right? Anybody have any thoughts about whether you think this is good or bad to have this?
Yeah. I'm just to kind of give my argument. You mentioned that everything in the Torah was patrilineal, who was the next son.
Yeah.
I'm going to kind of put emphasis. Yes, it's patrilineal, but it's determined by the mother. It's actually matrilineal. It's always the father, but which child of which wife is
That's
really,
true. That's definitely true. That's
and I
definitely
think
true.
so. And there has to be, I think that certain women were more righteous or holier, and that was the child that was going to be
Right.
the
Right.
next one.
Good point.
The other part, if we look at, we just read it last Shabbat in the Torah. It was in reference to kings, but there are two laws that were mentioned, and it was really the only two laws that God ever gives reasons to, I believe. And that is one, you should not have too many horses because the best horses are in Egypt, and you will go down to Egypt. And was really in reference to the king, but like I said, it could be for anybody. And the other one was that a man should not have too many wives.
Right.
And it's not because he will go astray. It wasn't because of polygamy, but it was more
No,
is that it was more because polygamy was accepted still.
exactly.
But it was because the quality of the woman that you be getting involved. They were afraid of if you read like a lot of Deuteronomy before, they were always afraid of like women priestess from other groups.
Right, exactly. It was
And that's what they were afraid of.
right,
And
right.
I think a lot of these practices are really to control men. That, in other words, I think we forget that men have certain things and certain drives, and the Torah kind of goes around many different ways to control it, like thou shall not covet, stuff like that. But I think so. The emphasis here is, I think, with a lot of this marriage stuff, is, we can't really control the men, but we can control the women.
Interesting. Interesting.
Because I know this might be a sellout question, but I always think it's true. You know, when the Orthodox, when women started to be accepted as rabbis, part of the minyan, and the Orthodox always held back. And what was their famous line? Why women don't have to dominate? And they'll always say, well, they're much more spiritual. They're
Right.
they don't
Right.
need to.
Right.
And
Right.
I think that's somewhat true.
Interesting.
And
Interesting.
and there, and I think from that standpoint that, it's one thing for a man to have an affair, but for women, I think it takes a lot more. I think it endangers the men. Men, they start to think with their pants and not with their head, and things go bad that way.
I think you're right. By the way, are people able to stay like for an extra 15 minutes? Because I don't know how I can cover everything that I want to cover today by 10:30. So can you like do a thumbs up or down?
You know what, Suzanne, anybody who can stay will stay, and people
Great.
that can watch the rest of the
Yeah,
recording.
yeah, yeah. Okay. I'm trying to get it all in.
So I
Okay.
was just going to finish up and say the burden sometimes is placed on the women unfairly
Oh, yeah, of course. Of
because
course.
she's like the bedrock.
It is a patriarchal society, lest we forget, right?
Right.
Okay, so now we're going to read a story that's in the Midrash that is kind of subversive. So, and then Robin, do you want to read the subversive story?
Okay,
Here
that
it
sounds
comes.
fine.
Okay.
Okay, this is in Tanhuma Naso 6.
Yeah, Naso is one of the Torah portions, and it's the Midrash on that particular chapter 6. Yeah.
Okay. A story is told of two sisters who resembled one another. One sister was married and lived in one city, and the other sister was married and lived in another city. The husband of one of them grew jealous of his wife and wanted to bring her to Jerusalem to drink the bitter waters. That sister went to the city where her sister lived with her husband. Her sister said to her, "Why did you see fit to come here?" And she said to her, "My husband wants me to drink the bitter waters." Her sister said, "I will go in your stead and drink." She said to her, "Go." She dressed herself in her sister's clothes and went in her stead. She drank the bitter waters and was found to be innocent. She returned to the home of her sister, who came out happily to greet her. She embraced her sister and kissed her on the lips. When they kissed one another, her sister breathed in the smell of the bitter waters, and immediately she died.
Oh
my
dear,
goodness.
yes. Oh dear. So let's just Oh, wait, I don't want to read.
Okay, it's very
Let's not talk.
interesting.
Okay, we're going to talk about it for a second. What is this story about? And is it positive, negative? What does it tell us?
I think it's about deception.
Deception. Okay. Is it a deception that you approve of? No.
Suzanne, can you put the slide back up?
Sure. Absolutely. Hang on.
Since I read it and it's very much in my ears and my mind, I think that if you subscribe to the whole premise of what the bitter waters will do to you, if you're guilty, you will die from it. If you're not guilty of the crime of having relations with another man, then you won't die. So the sister who offered to drink the bitter waters for her sister knew that she herself was not going to be punished by the bitter waters.
Right, but
she may not have known whether her sister had indulged or not, but this was the proof that her sister had.
Right.
So why she would do that? I don't know why she would do that.
Okay? What are anybody have thoughts about why she would do that for her sister?
Why would can I?
Yeah, Sandra.
Okay, so I think she would do it for her sister, because why would her sister ask her to go in her stead if her sister wasn't guilty? So she may have assumed that her sister was guilty and wanted to spare her.
Yeah. Okay, great. So let's look at what Ruth Calderon says about this. It's a story about sisterhood, although it was written when the Sota ceremony was no longer performed, if indeed it ever was again. We don't even know if this ever happened. It's just like they write about sacrifices and they write about the temple, even when that's no longer the case. There's no temple. But it served as a warning to women who might be tempted to collude against male power, right? It's like, you want to collude with each other to escape our laws? Forget it. The narrator of the story warns that anyone who tries to circumvent the law will pay with her life, and that the final kiss will be a kiss of death. Feminine loyalty will not triumph over masculine rule of law. Actions must be met with consequences, and ultimately justice conquers all. So this is, from the patriarchal male power point of view, you try to get around my laws, it's not going to work. The story features sisters in solidarity and a God who is accepting, assisting, winking at the woman from behind the back of her jealous husband, like a mother who smiles at her eldest son from behind the back of his grumbling younger brother, like an accomplice. Sisterly solidarity in this story, as in the discourse of feminism, is a force that is stronger than just blood ties, a force that cannot be overcome. The force of women who would not hesitate to violate the law for the sake of one another. The solidarity of the downtrodden. So I think Ruth Calderon has a more sort of compassionate view. I mean, here are these women trapped in this system where, the men have the power, the women have no power, and they're trying at least to show solidarity with each other. It doesn't really work because obviously the woman dies in the end anyway. So it's a warning, but it's also a way to show that maybe by getting together, women can have more power. The narrator of the story, from his masculine perspective, fails to appreciate the complexity of the relationship between the sisters. He regards his solidarity as a threat to the social order, of course. The more women, unite and fight against the system, the more there is a possibility that they could change the system or, on the other hand, be totally repressed. And I think it really does come down in the end to the fact that a woman has the power to create a human being, a power that is restricted to God in the Torah. Her ability to give birth and to choose the father of her child poses a threat to the entire masculine order. Men, in turn, try to rule over that which cannot be controlled, to be masters of the procreative capacity. What's interesting about the Torah, who creates life in the Torah? Anybody? Who creates the human being in the Torah? Somebody puts it in. God.
God does.
Okay, God is the one who creates human beings. What gender is God in the Torah,
Male.
Male.
Well,
right?
not necessarily, because right in the beginning of creation, it says God creates both him and her in his image.
Right. I'm talking, yeah, it's true. So God has a feminine side or a female side, definitely. But God is a he in the Torah. And I don't think that's coincidental that, again, I don't want to cast any aspersions on any of the men here, but, men, it kind of freaks them out that, women can create life and they can't. And women have the power over a baby, right? You're a little
Well,
tiny baby male, and this woman can feed you or not, right? Sarah, do you want to go ahead?
Hi, thanks. So, in reflecting on Ruth Calderon's assessment, I feel that she brings up some very important points, but I feel that she's not addressing actually one of the most important points, and that is how to deal with emotional and physical betrayal, which is what happened.
Mm-hmm.
This has I don't know how much this has to do with sisterhood as it has to do with an accomplice to betrayal.
Okay, that's a
And
valid point.
so, how does one manage emotional and physical betrayal?
That's an
And yeah, so
that's a very good point. And that's not her focus here, but yeah, I mean, you're right about that. If there's betrayal, of
it's,
course, yeah,
yeah, it's just kind of, um, she's articulate, Ruth Calderon. She
yeah,
expresses herself incredibly well, but she doesn't mention the word betrayal in that. And
that's
and
yeah.
and so all the things that she's mentioning may be true, but like what I guess when we are dealing with I guess I mean that just the betrayal, how does one manage betrayal within an intimate relationship?
May I
That's
comment?
an excellent point. Excellent point. That
May
I
I
guess,
comment on this?
of course.
Well, I'll say, Rabbi Suzanne, you brought up this entire remedy to the suspicion of a wife's indiscretion, dalliance, as a way for the man not to deal directly with his own fears and emotions.
Right.
So it's like a carve out experience. I'll take it to the rabbi is going to handle it for me. And I think what we're seeing, I really appreciate Rabbi Sarah's remarks about this, because we see that even in the telling of the story, we're avoiding the emotional content. And the remedy itself is an avoidance of dealing with the emotional content.
Well, you're absolutely right, and the focus of all of this is really on paternity. It's not so much about any feelings. It's
Yeah.
also about saving the wife's life. But yeah, Barbara, go ahead.
I got kind of a theoretical question, and I think this may have happened in my extended family. But supposing a woman gives birth to a baby, she's married to her husband and all that, and the baby comes out, doesn't look anything like him. The baby is a different race, obvious, not, whoops. So what happens? And, there is in my extended family, my nephew is married to a woman who is blonde hair and blue eyed, but her so-called biological father was Asian. She doesn't look Asian at all. She has
Well,
blonde hair, blue eyes,
yeah.
not Oriental looking eyes. I mean, I think her mother had an affair.
Listen,
So,
with
and then
DNA
she got
test,
away with it. So,
you know what? With DNA testing, people are discovering all kinds of things.
but
Oh,
they didn't
that was
have
not my real father. Oopsie. Yeah, there's a lot of that going on because, in fact, I was just reading an article yesterday about how we've discovered a lot more incest than we ever knew about. Okay. Now, I think in the case, if a kid is born and let's say they're of a different race, I would imagine they would have to go to some sort of a Beit Din to determine what to do about that. If a child is the result of an adulterous affair, then the child becomes a mamzer, which is like a bastard, but they're like different gradations in. This is in the more Orthodox world, right? A Kohen is the top, then a Levite, then a regular Israelite, and then a mamzer. And mamzer can only marry other mamzers, okay? And it's a very low status in the society, so it's not a good thing for the kid. That's another thing. This sort of protects the kid too. Okay, let's just look at the conclusion that Ruth Calderon has for these stories. So she says the ritual was abolished by the time of the Talmud. The waters could only test a woman whose husband had never committed adultery or other sexual violation himself. So Yohanan ben Zakkai maintains that the ritual was discontinued because adulterers proliferated. So to the warning of the wife about a very specific man with two witnesses, the husband himself had to be one who had never committed adultery. So that was one of the reasons, apparently, that the whole ritual was discontinued, because there's so many adulterers around. The sages formulated principles that forged a new atmosphere in which jealousy was less rampant. These principles include most sexual acts are attributed to the husband. Okay, they declare this. In other words, children of uncertain paternity are assumed to belong to the husband. In addition, they declare that the man who raises the child and not the man who conceives it is considered the father. That is to say, fatherhood is constituted by the act of child rearing rather than procreation. So in other words, the sages are trying to find a way to mitigate this jealousy and the question about paternity and all of that. And also, actually, this is where, Sarah, I think there's a little bit of attention to feelings. The husband feels betrayed or whatever. Well, if we can assure that any of these kids are really your kids, no matter what, then I guess that mollifies the husband to some extent, right? They're trying to get rid of the cause of jealousy. Like, oh, if it's somebody else's child and I'm not the father, then you slept with someone else. Well, let's find a way to just get out of that whole morass of, whose kid is whom. And we're going to say that the man who raises the child is the father, and let's just leave it at that and not probe too deeply. And then finally, the sages, expert at communal leadership, encouraged the couple to separate by means of a financial arrangement with as little hoopla as possible. The site of judgment was thus shifted from the temple to the courtroom. In other words, rather than bringing the wife to the priest, of course, there's no priest anymore, no temple, we go into the courtroom and we say, hey, let's just, this is again, I think, a way to mitigate some of the feelings. Like, let's just give you some time apart to calm down and whatever. And hopefully you'll then both, be reconciled at some point. It's just like not make a big deal out of it, okay? Okay, so any final comments on that before we go to this very strange story that I'm going to share with you, which is the title of the book, A Bride for One Night. Any other comments or questions? Okay. So let's look at A Bride for One Night. Okay. So what could this possibly mean? Well, what happens if you're a sage, you're a very important rabbi, Rabbi Ben Zakkai, or one of these guys that is quoted here, and you have to go to another town for a while, right? This happens. We have people who go, scholars who go from one place to the other, and they spend a weekend or a week or something, or maybe a few months. Is there a problem there? Well, let's look at what it says. This is in the Talmud called Yoma. When Rav would happen to come to Darshish, he would declare, "Who will be married to me for the day that I am here, so that I will not be unwed in this place, after which I will divorce her." Similarly, when Rav Nachman would come to Shechan Siv, he would declare, "Who will be married to me for the day that I am here?" Any surprises here? So the sage goes to some other town, and he apparently can't be without a woman for one night. So he marries a random woman. Therefore, well, he wouldn't be committing adultery anyway if the woman were not married. But the point is, he's doing it in a very kind of legal way, right? I'm going to marry her. So it's not like I just have sex with a prostitute, right? And is this surprising to you at all? Is it upsetting? Is it
Well, if
weird?
he does have sex, then it's sanctified. And if he's not married, then it isn't.
Absolutely.
So that's it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a little surprised by this, but okay, let's go on. Okay, so, all right. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said that even in marriage, one should be careful not to create a situation that could lead to the birth of mamzerim. Again, mamzerim is sort of like a bastard. Therefore, a man should not marry a woman in this country and then go marry another woman in a different country, lest a son from one marriage and a daughter from the other, unaware that they are both children of the same father, unite with one another, and it could emerge that a brother marries his sister, the children of whom would be mamzerim. And the Gemara says, is that so? Is there really such a prohibition? So in other words, it's like people who go to a DNA, I mean a sperm bank, right? To get pregnant. And what happens if this one particular man has donated his sperm and many women have children from that sperm, okay? And then they meet each other and they find out, oops, you're my half brother or my half sister. That's like not a good thing, right? Because the children of such a coupling are going to have some genetic problems if they're that close, their parents are that closely connected. So the rabbis are, yeah, Barbara.
That happened. There was a head of a sperm bank, and he fathered 25 kids or more, or something like that. He used his own sperm to conceive these children.
Right.
And they're finding this out later. And there was something on Netflix about that, or something.
Big PBS story also.
Or PBS, something. Yeah, I saw a movie about that.
Yeah, no, so it's a problem. It's a possible problem. And so so the rabbis are going, wait a minute, what are we going to do in the case, excuse me, of, okay, I've got all these things coming up on my computer, sorry. Okay. What are we going to do if, people go to, somebody goes to a community and marries a guy and, oh, you're my, but the sages have a way to deal with that, believe it or not. So let's see what they do, because they always have a solution to every problem.
The sages didn't have in vitro fertilization back in the biblical times. What are you talking about?
No. Of course they didn't, but they had a way to deal with this. So, but didn't Rav, when he happened to come to Dardashir, make a public announcement saying which woman will be my wife for the day, i.e. for the duration of my visit? Since his wife did not accompany him to Dardashir, he wished to be married to another woman while he was there, in order to avoid a situation that could lead him to having forbidden thoughts. And also, Rav Nachman, of course, it's not a forbidden thought if you're married to the person, right? And in those days, there was polygyny. You were allowed to have more than one wife, okay? That in the Ashkenazic community, that ended in the year 1000. But up until then, no problem. As you see in the Torah, there are men who have many wives also. So also Rav Nachman, when he happened to come to this one town, made a public announcement saying which woman will be my wife for the day. It would appear from the fact that both sages married wives in two different places that there's no prohibition in doing so. Okay, but we still have this problem of the possibility that their kids will meet and get married. The Gemara rejects the proof. Sages are different as their names are renowned, and therefore their children are always identified by their connection to their father. Therefore, excuse me, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov's concern does not apply to them. Okay, isn't that a clever way to deal with this? I mean, there's no problem. The sages are well known. We're going to know if their kids are meeting each other and deciding to get married. So it's cool. Of course, for everyone else, that doesn't apply, right? It's only the sages who get to do this. So,
But how would they know? I mean, I don't mean to make too much of the uncertainties of these questions. You know, the questions beg a lot of other questions.
yeah.
But I mean, if a man marries on a business trip for a night or two, marries another woman, and then divorces her, it's going to be 9 months later if she's impregnated, right? So how will
Yeah.
she necessarily know who the father is and how that baby should be identified as the child of that man who came to her community 9 months ago?
Women were not allowed to have many husbands. Only husbands were allowed to have many wives.
Okay.
So she wouldn't be married to anybody else, or he would have committed adultery, remember?
Yes, but
And
now
far
she's
be it from a
divorced.
sage, huh?
But now she's divorced. I mean, this
Yeah.
just happened in one, moment in time. And now she's divorced and she is free to marry whomever she chooses or who chooses her. And she has a baby. I mean, who's to say whose baby that is?
I guess it depends on how quickly she gets married.
Yes.
And presumably, in those days, there was a year between being engaged and getting married. So there probably would have been plenty of time. And that's
Okay.
probably why there would have been
Mhm.
plenty of time to know whose kid he was,
Because I think in our contemporary lives, that is not uncommon.
Right, that does happen. But I think because of the amount of time it takes to get married, that's probably a guarantee against any kind of confusion. Um, but what kind of questions does this raise for you? This idea that a sage can go off and marry somebody for a day or a month or whatever, and then divorce her.
Men seem to believe they have a great deal to be afraid of
That's definitely true.
women.
But what happens to the woman? What are her options at this point?
Not good.
I mean, I wonder if the sage sends her, alimony and child support, right? Among many other problems. All right, let's see what Ruth Calderon has to
Does
say.
he have to give her a get
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
So, if it's a get, like you said before, it's a business deal. Does she get anything in that business deal?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Actually, that doesn't get addressed in this book. But that's a great question. I'm assuming she brings something into the marriage that would then be her property if there's a divorce. But I don't know how much time they have to make the arrangements they need to make. And usually you don't get married right away. What's
They
that?
had enough time to get the get, and you
Yeah.
have enough time to get the
Actually, come to think of
ketubah.
it,
They had enough. They have to sign the ketubah.
yeah. And also
everything's up front. Everything is up front.
right. No, but I'm thinking usually the engagement was a year before the actual marriage. So I don't know how they got around that one too. I guess they just squished it all together really quick.
I think it's power, man. If you're a sage, you can do those things.
Exactly. And you don't have to worry about your offspring because everybody knows who they are and blah, blah. And it sounds like a lot of nonsense. But anyway, Bobby, did you have your hand?
Yes, I go along with the young man that was just speaking. I was kind of curious if this guy is going into town and he knows he's separated from his wife and he's going to do this, he probably has what you might call a free prefab get already made up, and then he takes this from town to town and he just puts the new name on it and she signs it and they become matrimonially connected. And then when he leaves, he gives her the get. He says, okay, now here you go. This is our separating agreement. Just like, when a traveling salesman he has a bill of sale for all of his products, pre-made. He's got a whole book of them, And so he just goes every time he goes, he says, oh, you ordered a vacuum cleaner here. I'll give you a bill of sale on that. So this is what I imagine these people were privileged to do, is to have a way of buying into a situation and, of course, an exit strategy so they can get out of that situation where everybody's okay with it. And number two, the kind of woman that would be a wife for a day would be somebody who, like you said, is not married. Maybe, and if it's a sage, not a, if it was a clergyman, he can't marry a divorced woman. So it'd have to be somebody who, probably her prospects there in town aren't doing so good, And so, a live one that comes into the bar, she's willing to take on, So
Yeah,
I
well,
just think in those societies, everything was kind of loose but tightly knit around um, male perversion. I mean, they called the shots when it came to sexuality, and
yeah,
the women had their place. Now, the only way a woman could circumvent that is by these men's um, problem, their promiscuity, that they need a woman to fulfill certain desires. And
right.
so that's where we find our empowerment, so to speak, where we can call a few of the shots.
Okay, great. Well, by the way, there's another option for these women. Since you were allowed to have more than one wife, he could have brought her home too and said, "Hey, hi, honey, I got another wife here," right? So let's see what Ruth Calderon has to say about this and the questions that she brings up. Okay, so does this practice reflect more than just the valorization of promiscuity? Were the women who were chosen members of the Jewish community? Why did the rabbis prefer to get entangled in a complicated procedure like one-day marriage instead of simply sleeping with an anonymous woman under cover of night? We read in the Talmud about one who was seized by his evil impulse. He should dress in black and wrap himself in black and go to an unknown city. Was turning to a prostitute beneath the dignity of the rabbis, whereas they would not hesitate to co-opt the sacred institution of marriage for the sake of preserving their own reputations? Those are all questions. You know, who are these women? Where do they come from? Are they really willingly saying, yes, I will be your wife? And what was wrong, with just having a quick affair or whatever? Now, she actually has a slightly positive spin on this, which is interesting. So she says the institution of marriage for a day affords the rabbis opportunities for self-reinvention. In a foreign city to which he is invited, the rabbi has a chance at another life. A new woman, a new body, love in a foreign language. This new wife for a night is not like his wife, who has seen him at his moments of greatest weakness. This new wife sees him at his best. Okay, that's a very interesting thing to think about. Of course, again, it's only afforded to the men, but maybe having this one night thing allows him to explore and appreciate in ways that he hasn't before, because, the wife, they've been together for a long time and it's not as exciting as it once was. Or maybe the visiting rabbi feels inadequate when he is on his own. As the sages teach, one without a wife is not a man. But can a man not stay alone even for a few days? Alternatively, is the whole institution of marriage for a day intended as a sexual outlet, a product of the cultural milieu of the Talmudic sages that justified hasty matrimony? So these are a few things to think about when we think about this very strange institution. In this particular historical context, when who will be mine for the night is a prerogative only of men, the injustice is that much greater. Of course, we notice that. When confronted with the question, who will be mine for a day, could a woman really answer, I will? Why would she do so? Right? As you said, Bobby, I think, did she have no other prospects? Who knows what would have made her available? Okay, the Tosafot are medieval commentators, grandchildren of Rashi, who's the 11th century French commentator, who all comment also on the Talmud, suggests that this encounter is meant to bring the woman into the rabbi's home. That which begins as a one-night stand will ultimately lead her to become one of the wives of the head of a great Talmudic academy. Oh, wow, this is a positive. So she could come home with this guy who's now her husband and be part of the household of a great Talmudic sage. Isn't she lucky? Don't, turn your nose up at stuff. But what will this woman's status be if indeed she goes back with the rabbi to his hometown? And what of his first wife? Is she expected to be happy with a new addition to the household in the way that parents encourage their eldest child to be happy about the arrival of a new baby? Was it just that the Tosafot did not dare to admit that the Talmud is giving voice to a dream that lies buried in every man's heart? Was the one-night stand too disturbing for them, such that they had to assume that a shared future was in the cards? So in other words, we can look at this as maybe this is just a fantasy that these rabbis have. Do they really do this, or did they just write about it? I mean, they write about a lot of stuff that they don't do. As I said, sacrifices in the temple, which no longer exist, for example. So, maybe the Tosafot want to justify this in a way and say, hey, look at the opportunity this person gets. They get to be part of this really important household. But maybe she's going to go to the household and not be too happy, and the first wife may not be too happy. So is it good or bad?
Well, I think it's.
Hey, can you hang on just 1 second? This is the last slide, and then we'll talk about it, okay? So confining matrimony to one day contradicts the very essence of the marriage covenant, which pledges constancy for an unbounded period of time, even though we don't say for better, for worse, for sickness and in health, etc., till death do us part. We don't say that at a Jewish wedding, but that's the idea. That's theoretically. You don't get married for a few days and think, I can always get out of this. No, it's a sacred pledge to each other. Now, she says, on the other hand, it reflects respect for the now, for living one day to its fullest. Under conditions of marriage for one day, the criteria for choosing a spouse change, as does the definition of love. The appeal of the one-night stand is bound to make us think twice about how much opportunity we waste in our lives of routine and fidelity. Again, this is a pretty bold statement. She's saying, hey, when you're with one wife for a long period of time, it becomes very routine. If you want excitement, maybe think about doing this bride for one day. And maybe you'll pick somebody who's not like the kind of woman you'd want to be married to for 40 years. But hey, for a night or two, what the heck? It might be enjoyable. Okay, James.
Yeah. Make sure. Yeah, it's actually same. I don't think times have changed.
Really?
I mean, you got men with midlife crisis. Yeah, you always hear about the older guy marrying the younger woman after he dumps his wife after she reaches 45. I think, this is definitely a man's power. And notice it's a sage. It's a guy of wealth and status. That's another thing. That I think a lot of guys that get status and wealth sometimes change. Look at Jeff Bezos, good example. He dumped his wife for many, many years, and she was the one that really helped him create that company. And, she did well at the end. But, I don't think things have changed,
You're right. You're right. Absolutely.
I think for guys without money, it's a prostitute. Guys with money, you can have a second life. Divorce is not cheap.
Oh, yeah. Believe me, I'm reading this book about female, Jewish marital captivity.
So with there's that great saying about a prostitute, you don't pay her for sex, you pay her to leave. And I think it's the same thing here, that if you don't want to do a prostitute, you want a relationship. It sounds like he's looking for something new. This is a change, and this is the excuse. And in those days, you did have polygamy and you could do things like that.
Right. Yeah, I do. I think, Ruth Calderon, as I said, I was a little surprised at her conclusion that, this allows for kind of playfulness and creativity and spontaneity and all these things that usually don't happen in a marriage after a certain amount of time.
Right.
So again, if women have the same right, it would be different. But, luckily women have more agency today.
Well, it's with, I remember Liz Taylor. Remember, she had like 7 marriages. And she said, they asked her, why did she get married? And she said, I prefer to be married to the guy than live in sin,
Yeah, there is that.
Which makes some sense, actually.
So next week, we're going to talk about forbidden love. these have all been, well, having an adulterous affair is forbidden too, but we're going to delve more into those kinds of stories. Marcia, thank you so much.
Thank
for
you
hosting me.
I'm so glad you were here. I was listening throughout, and I learned a lot. I hope you'll join us again. And again, thank you for those who are able to support this class. If you can go on the Jewish Collaborative website, make a donation if you're able to. Many of you do. And we can't wait to see you again. And then we have another, I'll tell you more after the third class about some of the upcoming courses that we're offering in October. Just so you know, we're studying with Rabbi Karen Aviv, who works for Judaism Your Way in Denver. And she just wrote a book about the history of Jewish anxiety, both for communities and for individuals. And you can buy her book ahead of time. It's not very expensive. I read it. I really liked it. And she'll be taking us through the book through the month of October. So I just wanted to give you that so you could have a chance to order the book and read it in advance if you'd like. See you next week, everybody.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank
Rabbi
you,
Singer.
Thank you, Rabbi Schechter.